I'm announcing my candidacy for the United States Senate.
This week in Pennsylvania, Dave McCormick ran last year for the U.S. Senate. He's running again, this time with his sights on Bob Casey. Automatic voter registration when you get or renew a driver's license. Governor Shapiro calls it expanded access. Some Republicans call it a scheme. And the U.S. Senate is no longer enforcing its dress code, a huge win for a certain PA senator with a penchant for hoodies and cargo pants. Hello and welcome to This Week in Pennsylvania. I'm Dennis Owens. We're covering hot topics in PA policy and politics, as well as the issues that are important to you and your family. Well, Democrats will keep control of the state house by one seat after a special election in western Pennsylvania this week. Lindsey Powell defeated Republican Erin Connolly Autenreith in the race to replace Sarah Innamorato, who resigned to run for Allegheny County Executive. Democrats now narrowly control the chamber, 102 to 101. They are back in session on Tuesday. Well, it was the worst kept secret in Pennsylvania politics, and the secret is now out. Dave McCormick, the wealthy former hedge fund manager, is running for the U.S. Senate for the second year in a row. The Republican wants to challenge incumbent Democrat Bob Casey. Now, last year, McCormick lost a primary to Mehmet Oz by less than 1,000 votes. Democrats will cast him as an out-of-touch and out-of-state rich guy with ties to China who will turn his back on the working class. McCormick will tie Casey to President Biden.
My opponent is a rubber stamp. More to the point, he's Joe Biden's rubber stamp. When Joe Biden says jump, Bob Casey says. When Joe Biden says vote, Bob Casey says which way. When Joe Biden comes calling, Bob Casey comes running.
Now, unlike last year, McCormick faces no GOP challengers, and Republican insiders tell me they don't expect one. But defeating Bob Casey, the four-term U.S. Senator, former Auditor General, and Treasurer, who has never lost a general election in PA, will not be easy. Casey expects it'll be a tough fight, and he says he's ready for it.
The one thing about any election, whether it's your own or those you're supporting, is it does give you a chance to have a conversation with the people about specific issues and what you've done and where you stand. And I look forward to that.
Yeah, it's daunting. It's like challenging a Kennedy in Massachusetts, I guess. But you never know how these things work. Eventually, a Kennedy lost in Massachusetts.
Now, speaking of next year's elections, the move to give PA a bigger voice in the presidential primary took another step forward this week. The full Senate passed a bill that would move up next year's primary from April 23rd to March 19th, leapfrogging four states, including New York and Wisconsin, on the primary calendar. It's for next year and next year only, and it would get Election Day off the first day of Passover. Critics fear it will confuse the electorate and put more strain on counties. That bill now moves to the full House. Speaking of primary elections, all five living former Pennsylvania governors signed a letter in support of opening primaries in PA. Tom Ridge, Mark Schweiker, Ed Rendell, Tom Corbett, and Tom Wolf all signed it to let voters cast primary ballots for candidates of parties outside their registered party affiliation. Right now, our primaries are what's called closed. So registered Democrats can only vote for Democratic primary candidates, Republicans for Republicans. There are more than 1 million independent or unaffiliated voters left out of those primaries. And there are bipartisan bills in both chambers that would open up primaries. A move to make voter registration easier or a scheme? Well, that depends on who you talk to. This week, Governor Josh Shapiro announced that every eligible voter who gets or renews their driver's license at the DMV will be automatically registered to vote. They can, of course, opt out, but otherwise will be directed to sign up. Shapiro says it will increase participation in elections. State Senator Chris Dush calls it unconstitutional because the governor circumvented the legislature on an election matter. Skeptics wonder whether Shapiro is trying to give Democrats an advantage.
I think what it's doing is giving our democracy an advantage. We're not checking your registration. We don't care what your views are on issues.
The state insists that only those who are legally eligible to vote will be allowed to register at the DMV. Well, the State House will come back on Tuesday with lots of items on their agenda, chiefly finishing the budget. House Minority Leader Brian Cutler, he was at the Pennsylvania Press Club in Harrisburg this week. He criticized Democrats for not getting more done more quickly and for too few session days. But we asked him about the 2020 election and alleged attempts by former President Donald Trump to coerce him into changing the result. Cutler says his lawyers notified Trump's lawyers that they just couldn't do it. So will Cutler now support Trump in 2024?
Well, me personally, I think that we need to look for somebody who's electable and can win the general. I'm for the most conservative person who can still win the general election. Right now, I think that's Nikki Haley.
On the budget front, Cutler said his caucus still has misgivings about Penn State, Pitt, and Temple not promising to freeze tuitions in exchange for state aid, so their funding is still in limbo. Well, we all want to hit the lottery, but if we do, should we be publicly named? A bill that passed the Senate unanimously this week would give the winner the option of being identified or not. Currently, lottery winners' names are released unless they set up a trust to shield themselves. Lawmakers say that makes them a target for identity theft and scams, especially seniors. That bill's now onto the House.
I've heard from lottery officials who have said, they like it the way it is right now because it shows the public that there are winners.
Now, lawmakers dismiss that. They say the lottery can still be transparent without specifically naming names. Well, 15 years ago, Pennsylvania banned indoor smoking at most places. Most, but not all. There are VFWs and legions and bars, and most notably casinos, that still allow smoking. Well, this week, clean air advocates say it's time for lawmakers to finish the job and ban smoking in all of those venues for the safety of their workers. Establishments push back that customers come there specifically because they allow smoking, and a ban would hurt their businesses.
They can walk in the doors. We advertise that we're a smoking establishment on the doors, on our coupons, on our website. It's their choice to work here, and it's their choice to eat here.
It's not a choice for somebody that has to choose between a paycheck, paying their rent, making a livable income, or their health.
Now, interestingly, Parks Casino's the state's most lucrative. It does not allow smoking and has still been turning record profits. Well, this week marked the 9th annual Recovery Advocacy Day. At this point, all of us know someone who has battled addiction. Advocates and lawmakers were at the state capitol to raise awareness of substance use disorders and spotlight the services available to help. Individuals in recovery were also celebrated.
We, as long-term recovery advocates, need to get our faces out there and show that we're the faces of recovery. We used to be exactly like those people, but we have gotten better, and we have built better lives because of it.
At the event, free Narcan was also distributed. Well, the Senate's dress code is loosening up. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer will now allow senators to wear whatever they want on the floor. In the past, senators were not allowed to enter the chamber if they were wearing hoodies, shorts, or gym clothes. The obvious big winner in all this, Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman. There he is in all his grandeur. He's famous for wearing hoodies and shorts anytime, anywhere. This policy change only affects the senators themselves. Staffers and guests must still wear coats, ties, or business attire. Sadly, we learned this week of the passing of Temple University's interim president, Joanne Epps, who died suddenly. Epps was rushed to the hospital after falling ill on a stage at a university event. Doctors say she suffered a, quote, sudden episode. Epps was the university's first black president and held roles ranging from campus bookstore worker all the way to interim president. She was 72. Stay with us. We'll be back. Welcome back to This Week in Pennsylvania. We're pleased to be joined by Pennsylvania Secretary of State Al Schmidt. He was a Republican city commissioner in Philadelphia, oversaw elections there. Governor Shapiro, a Democrat, tapped you to be his Secretary of State. I guess he's thinking Republicans might have a tendency to complain about elections unless they put a Republican in charge of it. Is that the idea? Pretty bold move.
When elections are done best, they're done in a bipartisan or nonpartisan way at all.
Well, I'm old enough to remember when people never paid attention to who was running elections. It was almost like the referee on the football field. You're trying not to pay attention to him, but that seems to have changed. We're in partisan times now, and elections are getting dragged into that. Does that concern you?
It has a lot, and the day after a game, you never want to read stories about a referee. So election officials, they're never really seeking the spotlight. And you never see a headline that says Election Day went smoothly yesterday. So the smoother elections go, know, the more obscure election administrators are in doing their important public service, the better.
Let's talk about the news this week, because there's a couple headlines involving you and involving Department of State. So automatic voter registration when you go to get your driver's license or renew your driver's license. Republican Senator Chris Duss said the governor's automatic voter registration scheme amounts to the rigging of the process to favor thoughtless and even accidental registration in the name of quote-unquote democracy, arguing that the legislature should have been involved in such a decision. What's your response to that?
Well, the applicant, when they apply for a driver's license or need to change their address or need to change their name or whatever else, would encounter a screen. And the screen would say, in proceeding, you are now going to be registered to vote. You have the ability to opt out. You have the ability to choose not to be registered to vote should you want to do that for one reason or another.
Back in the day, and you knew this because you were in Philadelphia doing it when we rolled this out initially, and initially was you had to opt in, now you have to opt out, basically, is the switch, right?
That's basically the dynamic.
Right. But back then, there were people that were here legally, but were not legally allowed to vote. So in other words, they're not citizens, but they're here legally. Okay, I can get my license. And a couple of those did get registered to vote. Have we closed that loophole?
Yes, and I brought this to the attention of the Pennsylvania Department of State long before I was there in 2017. And essentially, if you're a non-citizen in Pennsylvania and you're here legally, you have work papers, you have stay papers, you have your foreign passport, a visa, or all the rest, you're eligible to get a driver's license. If you are, your record indicates that you are not a citizen. So non-citizens would not be prompted to register to vote.
Other headlines: moving the primary from April 23rd to 19th. That passed the full Senate. What's your overall thought on that?
Well, the governor's been supportive of that move. There are a couple different reasons, I think, in favor of moving it. One, obviously, is the conflict with Passover. Another is to sort of elevate Pennsylvania's importance in the primary election
But I've heard some from county folks that we almost don't care what date you are, just do it quickly and let us know what it is so we can prepare.
That's right. After 10 years of running elections, the thing you care about most is certainty. You don't like things changing. You need to make sure that you can prepare everything just right. There's no redos when it comes to elections. And it's important that voters be educated about when Election Day is, when the deadlines are to apply for a mail-in ballot or to register to vote.
And just securing all the places and the machines that you need to have for a specific day, that doesn't just happen the week before the election.
That's right. It's many thousands of polling places secured, typically a year or more in advance.
There's a push to open PA primaries. Committee of 70, which used to be a part of, is calling for that. We currently have a closed system, and they argue more than 1 million independents basically are shut out of the system. As the Secretary of State, what's your thought on that?
I know there's some active legislation on it. The governor's administration doesn't yet have a position on it, but I know has consistently been in favor of anything that improves voter access and makes it easier to register and cast your vote.
I was struck because I listened to your confirmation hearing in the state Senate, and one of the first things you said was, I will issue no guidance less than 45 days before an election. Which a number of Republicans have been complaining for several years, your predecessors, that they would issue guidances like in the days right around elections. You were a guy on the receiving end of those guidances. So talk about what went into you saying that, and I think you took one of their arguments right off the table before they had a chance to bring it up.
Well, I have to say, running elections, you know, it's interesting now being at the Department of State because it's really a put up or shut up moment. So any complaints I had from the perspective of an election administrator, it's
the buck stopping there.
That's right, entirely. And it's really best to provide any kind of guidance or directives from the Pennsylvania Department of State for how elections should be run well in advance. So everyone knows what the rules are and all the preparations can be made as they should be.
Congratulations. You got a Presidential Citizens Medal from President Joe Biden, in large part because in the 2020 election when Donald Trump was trying to pressure you into, I don't know what, changing the results or suggesting that there was fraud, you said there was no fraud here, nothing to see here. Just what's your recollection of that entire chapter?
Literally did nothing different than what election administrators did across our country in big cities and rural counties, red and blue alike, and that was advocate for their voters and that their voters' votes be counted.
So dead people didn't vote in Philadelphia?
No.
Very good. That was an important answer right there. It was a very, very brief one. We're going to come right back. We've got more to talk about. He's Secretary of State Al Schmidt. We're happy to have him. We're happy to have you right there. Stay there. Welcome back to This Week in Pennsylvania. We are joined by Secretary of State Al Schmidt and our analyst, Christopher Nicholas of the Eagle Consulting Group and Danielle Gross of ClearPoint Communications. Danielle, you have the first question.
Sure. Thanks for joining us. As we know, it's businesses and nonprofits are looking to, trying really hard to get people to fill openings, and poll workers, the folks who run elections in our local communities, are no different. Do you anticipate counties having a hard time filling poll worker positions in the coming year? And does the administration have any plans to promote poll workers in Pennsylvania's communities?
Danielle, I think you're really identifying one of the biggest challenges that we face and have faced for a while when it comes to election administration, and that is the loss of experienced poll workers. The friends and neighbors who volunteer essentially for a 14-hour day to make sure that you can go to your local rec center or the church down the street or wherever your polling place might be and cast your vote. There's been significant attrition over time. We are tracking it certainly at the state level when it comes to county election administration and doing what we can to help fill those important positions.
Chris.
Thanks for being with us, Al, and let me first add my voice to the litany of others and thank you for the stand-up job you did in 2020, speaking truth to power and making sure those votes in Philadelphia were counted correctly and just once. In terms of my question, though, everybody laments declining voter participation. What do you have in store for us, the administration, in trying to help people not just get registered to vote, but then actually exercising their right to vote?
Well, it really starts with being registered to vote. And I think that's what's so significant about the governor's action this week is it makes it that much easier for eligible voters to get registered so that they can cast their vote on election day. There's no voting without being registered, and there's no registering without being eligible.
One of the other roles of your office is to make sure that constitutional amendments are properly publicized. Quite tragically, your predecessor basically botched that part of the role on an amendment that has passed both chambers, was ready to go to the voters on helping sex abuse survivors sue their abusers. What have you looked at on that, and are the systems now in place to make sure that never happens again?
The systems are in place to prevent that from happening again, and they were put in place well before my arrival at the Pennsylvania Department of State. It's critically important that we do our job to make sure that voters have the ability to vote on ballot questions and all the rest, and it's our obligation to do so.
As a guy who's been involved in elections for a long time, what do you make of polls that increasingly over the last several years show that many voters increasingly distrust the result? What can you do to get that trust back?
Well, I think voter education plays a very important role, and I understand why voters have so many questions. Elections have changed a lot in the last few years. In Pennsylvania, most counties, when you vote in person, you're voting on a new in-person voting system. The voting by mail, which is a pretty new development. It only came about in primary 2020 and was passed in 2019. So it's no surprise to me that voters have a lot of questions. It's just that we all need to do what we can to be trusted voices and reliable voices to counter any efforts by bad faith actors to undermine confidence in the results when they lose.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you being with us. Secretary of State Al Schmidt. We're going to be right back with more on This Week in Pennsylvania. Back to This Week in Pennsylvania. More with our analysts, Chris and Danielle. Thank you both for being here. What? What's so funny? Dave McCormick gets into the race on Thursday. Can anybody beat Bob Casey? And he's like the gold standard in the state, isn't he?
I think if anybody can, it's Dave McCormick. I've been talking about for a while now that Casey got lucky, not his fault. And he's run in some very, very good Democratic years, 2006, 2018. Next year, with everything we know now, looks to be a fairly even-Steven type of election cycle. He'll have to deal with an unpopular Joe Biden, the Republican nominee. It depends on who it is. That's something Dave McCormick will have to deal with. So I think right now you have to give the edge to Casey, but you also can't just dismiss McCormick's chances offhand because he will have enough money to run a real race.
He has never lost a general election statewide.
Six statewide elections he's won. I don't think that Dave McCormick can pull it off. I'm not saying I think it's going to be a battle, for sure, in no large part because Dave McCormick has lots of his own money to spend on the race, and Mitch McConnell's PAC has already started to pour money into this race to attack Bob Casey.
I talked to Asa Hutchinson, who was in town 2 weeks ago. He's a Republican presidential candidate, for those of you who don't know. He's another one of them.
Former
but he
governor
says,
of
Arkansas. He says he thinks if it's Donald Trump, that would hurt Dave McCormick in purple Pennsylvania.
Donald Trump is one of those what we call high floor, low ceiling candidates, right? So he's never going to get below 45, but it's hard to see him getting above 47, and that would put a damper on everybody running, and not just in Pennsylvania, in other kind of purpley seats as well. And some people think, Danielle, you talked about all the races Bob Casey has won. That means he's run a lot of races. A lot of people think perhaps he's had his time. It's time to turn the page.
Quite frankly, I think that gives a lot of credit to President Trump and his influence on the race. The thing is that Dave McCormick is an extreme candidate. He has said repeatedly and avowed that he believes that abortion should be illegal with no exemptions for rape, incest, or the health of the mother. Repeatedly, multiple times. He has. Okay. He has kind of doubled back that maybe sometimes the health of the mother should be considered, but he is 100% coming for women's health care.
I don't think it's a key issue for him. Bob Casey is flip-flopped and
matured on that issue. Well, the last time we said it's not a key issue, though, Democrats clobber Republicans on it, and they know it, which is why they want to tie abortion to every single candidate running for any office.
Well, when they say it repeatedly, it's pretty easily to tie it to them.
Remember in 2006, Bob Casey was the pro-life Democrat, and now he's morphed. So that'll be an issue as well, how much he has changed.
Let me ask you quickly, the automatic voter registration at the driver's license, good thing, bad thing, much ado about nothing?
I think it's good. I think it gives people the option to opt out, which is key.
It's a nothing burger. There are two types of people out there, voters and non-voters. So it might increase the number of registrations. It's not going to move the needle on turnout.
The key is to make sure you go to the poll, not just to get registered.
Exactly. And you can register online with a piece of paper at your county, so there's lots of places to do it.
The governor estimated this week that there's about 1.5 million who are eligible to be registered that aren't registered.
And there's a reason for that. They don't want to be registered, okay? With online voter registration now, it takes 45 seconds. So those people, they're not inconvenienced.
Last word.
Gen Z doesn't know how to use stamps. I said it. I said it. Sorry, guys.
Hope to see you next week on This Week. Have a great week.